So a while back I started to make some videos, a red flag series of videos about how to know you're being tested on something. So I'm going to try to incorporate some of those ideas into these videos. How do you know you're being tested on the market participant exception? I mean, how do you know you're being tested on dormant commerce, right? You know you're being tested on dormant commerce when you have, first of all, a state, right, in your fact pattern doing something. You know, especially in Common Law 1, if it's the state, you're likely being, right, being tested on dormant commerce. Don't mess that up with Congress. If Congress is acting, you're being tested on the Commerce Clause. If a state or a city is acting, right, you're being tested on dormant commerce, right? So that's dormant commerce in general. Now, how do you know more specifically that you're being tested on the market participant doctrine? The only way I can test you on that, the only way any law professor can test you on that, the only way the bar exam can test you on that, is to have something going on where the state is actually operating a business. Not regulating it, but operating it, right? Owns and operates a business. If you see a state or a city, right, that is owning and operating a business, I would think that that's a red flag that you might be being tested on dormant commerce principles in general, and more specifically the market participant exception. Now, in the last video we talked about the South Dakota cement case, right, which sets the principle that the state, if it does, I'm sorry, I've got Laney here, of course, that the state, if it does own and operate a business, right, if it's not regulating a business in a discriminatory way, rather if it owns the business, like South Dakota owned the cement plant, so it was in the business of producing and selling cement. If you're in that business, listen to what I'm saying, if you're in a certain business, if you're in a certain market, right, then you can discriminate with regard to the business that you are in. What business was South Dakota in? South Dakota was in the business of producing and selling cement. So what does that mean? It means that with regard to producing and selling cement, right, South Dakota could discriminate against out-of-state interests, right? It could prefer in-state interests. Now, I want to talk about this. This gets a little bit sticky here, and involves a little bit of sort of economics. You need to familiarize yourself with this kind of concept of the stream of commerce, right? You know, when you look at, right now, as a matter of fact, people are talking about interruption of the supply chain, right? And that's the way the economy works, right? If let's say you're a car dealer. If you're a car dealer, you're in the business of what? Retail, right? Selling cars. You receive cars from the manufacturer and you sell them to the consumer. So if you're in the car dealer business, you are not a car manufacturer, right? And you're also not the consumer. You're in between the manufacturer and the consumer. The manufacturer, right, has supplies that come to the manufacturer, right? So, for instance, steel. So the car manufacturer is not in the steel business, but they do buy steel. So when you look at that, right, I'm leading us up to the Alaska timber case. That case is called South Central Timber versus Winnicke. And that case involves Alaska getting out of its, we use this term all the time, right, in common law, sort of getting out of its lane there, but and reaching beyond the market that it's in. And let's talk about the problem with that. So first of all, what happened in the Alaska timber case? Alaska was in what business, right? I'm going to sort of pose questions so you can think to yourself and pause if you have to. What business was Alaska in? Okay, so you should have said the business Alaska was in was right, cultivating and harvesting trees, right, lumber, and selling, right? So in Alaska, it turns out that the government owns a whole lot of land. So Alaska, and look at the issue spotting thing there, right? The fact pattern doesn't say, right, Alaska is regulating the lumber market. The fact pattern says Alaska, right, is harvesting and selling lumber. Okay, so is Alaska regulating or is Alaska in that market? Answer, Alaska is in that market. What does that mean, right, under the South Dakota case, right, a Reeves versus Stake rule. Well, that means that with regard to selling timber, right, that's the business they're in, right? Alaska's in the business of selling timber. That Alaska would be able to discriminate with regard to who it sold timber to, right, whether it would be in-state interests or out-of-state interests. So if Alaska said, look, this is our land, we are cultivating this stuff, we are harvesting this stuff, and we're selling it, that's the business we're in. And we're only selling to in-state businesses, right, and in-state people, right, to fill their needs first before we sell our timber to out-of-staters, there would have been no problem with that. Why? Because under those facts, Alaska would have been simply, right, participating in the market and discriminating against out-of-state interests only with regard to the market that Alaska was in. What did Alaska do instead, right? What do the facts say? The facts say that Alaska had a regulation that you could only purchase, right, they would only sell to a party, right, that would have to agree that before you removed the timber from Alaska, right, you would have it processed in a processing plant, right, cut into cants, right, and it would be processed like that in a processing plant within the state of Alaska. Okay, so now think about what's the problem here. Let me repeat the rule. You're allowed to discriminate, right, as a market participant with regard to the market you are in, and limited to the market you are in. You're not allowed to discriminate outside of that marketplace. So I'm going to use the terms upstream or downstream, right? What's downstream from a car dealer is the consumer. What's upstream from the car dealer is the manufacturer. What's upstream from the manufacturer would be raw materials, right, suppliers. If I'm in a certain market, if I'm a state and I'm in a certain market, I can decide, right, who I'm buying from and who I'm selling to, but I can't be regulating outside of the market that I'm in, upstream from me or downstream from me. And there, I've used a word that you should have caught, regulate, right? If I'm deciding who I'm going to sell to, I'm participating in the market. If on the other hand I decide that I'm only going to sell to somebody who gets it processed, right, who gets the material processed within the state, well, now you have to ask, is the state in the processing business? So what's the answer to that? Was Alaska in the processing business? The answer is no. They were not in the business of processing. They were in the business of selling. So as to selling, they were participating in the market, right? But as to processing, they were actually regulating, right? They were regulating in a way that favored in-state, private business interests. Remember those principles from the last video, right? What we're really after here is states, right, that regulate in a way that favors in-state private interests. And the question is, did that happen in the Alaska timber case? And the court says, yes, it did, right? You are not participating in the marketplace. You are regulating downstream, right, of the market that you're in. You're regulating, right, by requiring that the wood be processed, that the lumber be processed, right, in the in-state processing plants. That is not, you're not in that, you're regulating, right? And you're regulating to favor not the state itself, but private, because these processing plants are private companies, right? So I guess I should have made that clear. So you're also regulating in such a way as to advantage, right, in-state private business interests at the expense of out-of-state private business interests. So you want to think about that, right? How you know, how would you develop a fact pattern? You know, you could, again, I could pick any business, right, that I want the state to be in, widget manufacturing, right? Or how about car manufacturing, right? You know, and what you want to do is say, okay, with regard to, let's say the state owns a car manufacturing plant, right? And decides that it wants to use only natural resources that come from the state. I don't know, again, I don't know why a state would do this, but you could come up with any goofy fact pattern. So only would buy steel from you know, Michigan or Florida steel makers. I don't know if we have any, but whatever. You know, that would arguably be permissible, right? You know, if the manufacturer is in its own business, right? Getting supplies and manufacturing. But supposing then that the state, right, the state which owns a car manufacturing plant were to say, okay, we will only we will only sell, we will only supply our vehicles to dealers, who in turn would sell to in-state, only sell, right, to in-state residents. Okay, so now you got a problem, because you're in the manufacturing business, and now you're using your participation in the manufacturing business, right, to reach down below the market that you're in. It'd be one thing to say, we're only supplying vehicles to in-state dealers. Arguably, that's the business you're in too, right? I'm buying raw materials, I'm doing the manufacturing, and I'm providing vehicles to dealers, right? But as soon as I reach below that, right, and say, dealers to whom I supply vehicles may only sell, right, to in-state interests, to in-state persons or interests. Well, now you've broken the rule. Now you are not participating in the market. Right now you are regulating a market outside the market you're in, and you're regulating in such a way as to give an advantage to in-state interests over out-of-state interests. When you look at it all together, right, I know this gets kind of complicated. Dormant commerce, right, you have to look whether the law or policy discriminates. If it does discriminate, you have another step to do, right? You have to ask, okay, is the government in business, right? If the government is discriminating in the context of a business, right, that the government is running, the government may discriminate in favor of in-state interests as long as it is participating in that market, right? If the state, on the other hand, uses its participation in one market to regulate, let's just think of it this way, upstream from the market or downstream from the market, right? A different market. Then you got a problem. That is not market participation, that is market regulation. And to say it one more time, the state is not allowed to regulate, right, in a way that favors in-state business interests. And one more time also, that also applies to subdivisions of states, right, like counties and cities. So that's enough about this market participant doctrine. That's basically those two cases are what you need to know. Okay, you need to know South Central Timber, and you need to know the Alaska. You need to know Reeves versus Stake, the South Dakota case, and you need to know South Central Timber versus Winnicki, which is the Alaska timber case. Did I say South Dakota Timber? I mean South Dakota Cement. I don't know. It's one of those mornings. Anyway, know the South Dakota case and the Alaska case, you'll be good. So with that, stay well. We'll be back to talk about United Haulers. I mentioned in the last video that's a case I'm not very fond of, but we have to cover it. So stay tuned for that. And again, be well out there.